The bottom line, really, is that the people who are setting the law should be keeping the law. That was the thing that brought down Boris Johnson. And here are the facts. On the 29th to the 30th of October, the Chancellor has admitted last night that she rented out her Southwark home without obtaining the required selective landlord licence. She apologised in writing to the Prime Minister, said the error was inadvertent and applied for the licence once told. After consulting the independent ethics advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, Sir Keir concluded that no further investigation was necessary. Conservatives and Liberal Democrats branded one anyway, and the timing is exquisitely awkward, with a budget due on the 26th of November and speculation that she may raise income tax. What is this licence? Southwark operates selective licensing in defined wards. If you rent out a standard single household property in those designations, you need a licence or you risk a civil penalty or prosecution. Fees are around £900 to £945. The Council's own guidance states plainly that failure can lead to an unlimited fine, a civil penalty of up to £30,000, or a rent repayment order. In practice, where a landlord applies promptly once contacted, the authority often starts with an informal approach before escalating. None of this is exotic, it is basic compliance. So did she break the law? On a narrow point, yes. The underlying offence is operating a licensable let without a licence, regardless of intent. The ethical question is different. Does a prompt apology and remedial action suffice for a minister who sets the rules others must follow? Starmer says yes. Her opponents say that one rule for ministers and another for everyone else. Both arguments are intelligible. One emphasises proportionality, the other stresses example. Why does this matter politically? Because it lands inside a narrative of standards, because it collides with money. First, standards. Critics cite a list of housing-adjacent controversies and argue the government is normalising cost-cutting or corner-cutting. The BBC coverage captured this precisely, reporting the apology, recording the ethics advisor's view, and noting opposition demands for a probe. That constellation, admission, apology, official closure, partisan escalation, will repeat in headlines and questions. Second, money. The budget. The Office for Budget Responsibility is set to cut its productivity outlook, blowing an estimated £20 to £30 billion of a hole in the 5-year plans. That makes tax rises more likely and has turned rumour into maths. Opinions and options trailed by reputable outlets include an income tax increase, possibly focused on the basic rate. Some reports go further and float a 2p rise. The politics are obvious. The manifesto line was no rise in income tax, VAT or NICs, national insurance contributions. Breaking it courts fury, but the numbers are stark. Here is the sober maths. The Institute for Fiscal Studies estimates that adding 1p to all income tax rates raises around £10.9 billion a year by 2029 to 30, with the bulk from the basic rate band. A 2p rise, mechanically scaled, gets you into the low to mid £20 billion once it beds in, though behaviour will shave that. If instead you add 1p only to the higher and additional rates, you raise far less. In short, if you want big money fast, you either touch the basic rate or extend the personal tax base through threshold freezes, which quietly bite via fiscal drag. Now the argument. First, the rule of law point. It's not pedantic to expect the Chancellor to know the licensing rules where she is landlord. Ministers do not just obey the law, they model it. Selective licensing is designed to lift housing standards in precisely the kinds of streets political speeches extol. When ministers miss the basics, they erode the legitimacy they need to ask more of everyone else. The apology is right. The correction is welcome. But "I wasn't told" is a thin shield for someone who insists business must do its homework. Second, competence and priorities. The same government that struggles to track one borough's licensing scheme is weighing a once-in-a-generation tax decision. That jars. If the state wants public trust for a 2p uplift, it must show an obsession with its own competence and efficiency. Otherwise, voters will conclude that the administrative culture is sloppy at the micro level and grasping at the macro level, an unlovely mix. Third, The case against hiking the basic rate, it's the bluntest tool. It hits workers' pension income and landlords alike, and combined with frozen thresholds, accelerates fiscal drag. Middle earners end up squeezed while sentiment sours. If the Treasury wants revenue with fewer distortions, there are more surgical levers, broadened bases, prune reliefs, speed planning reform, so private capital does some lifting. And if you insist on rate rises, pair any increase with visible givebacks that lift growth incentives. The IFS is crystal clear that a 1p rise in the basic rate is where the real money lies, but what is arithmetically simple can be economically and politically clumsy. Fourth, the counter case for do the hard thing now. The OBR shock is not a media confection. If the gap really is north of £20 billion and the Chancellor wants to avoid salami slicing surfaces, then a single large transparent move, say 2p on the rate with a published sunset tied to productivity outturns, is at least honest. It also stops the slow bleed of endless nibbling. But honesty requires stating plainly that this breaks a pledge, explaining why, and showing the credible multi-year plan to reverse it. The worst course is coyness followed by stealth. Where does this leave Reeves? In a credibility bind of her own making. She wrote in The Guardian that Britain should defy the doomsayers and beat the forecast. That's a stirring line. It becomes hubris if she asks families to shoulder a 2p rise while her own compliance fell short of a £900 licence. Competence is cumulative, so is doubt. What should happen now? On the licence breach, total transparency. Publish the application timetable, fees paid and any penalties if levied. If Southwark chooses the informal route and waives penalties upon late compliance, say so. If not, pay promptly and move on. That is the same standard any conscientious landlord would meet. On the budget, if income tax must rise, build a package, not a headline. For example, any basic rate increase should be time-limited, paired with relief on investment and childcare that boosts labour supply and accompanied by a fresh timetable to end threshold freezes. Put an end to the easy fiction that you can raise large sums from someone else without touching the broad base. The numbers do not support it. On standards, stop playing email tennis with letters that pronounce matters closed. Standards are not closed by decree, they are earned by conduct. If the government wants to draw a line under ministerial mini-scandals, the line has to be performance, not prose. There's a wider lesson. A rules-based state that enforces modest housing licences and then thinks about taxing millions, an extra 2p, has to be obsessively fair in the small things if it wants consent for the big ones. The licence story is small in money, but large in meaning. It feeds a narrative that the centre is casual with its own paperwork, as we saw with Angela Rayner, yet hawkish with yours. If Reeves wants the country to shoulder a hard budget, she needs to demonstrate the opposite instinct fast. Until then, the charge will stick. A government flirting with a 2p raid while not getting its own house in order, literally. That can be corrected, but only by treating standards as a habit, not a press line. Rachel Reeves has skidded off the road. She needs to be persuaded to get back on the road and to apologise for her error and to make up, to pay the penalty.